Hi, I'm Natalie. 3 months ago, my brother Kieran looked me straight in the eye and said I was delusional for even thinking I could get into an Ivy League school. You're setting yourself up for disappointment, Nat. Maybe aim for Riverside Community College instead. And my parents just sat there, nodding like he was the voice of reason. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my 4.0 GPA or my perfect SAT scores. I just quietly went to my room and closed the door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But this morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls and a string of frantic texts. Now they're all saying they need me desperately. They're begging me to fix this family crisis and be the bigger person. So what changed? What could possibly make the same family who called me delusional suddenly act like they're the only hope? Well, let me tell you exactly what happened when my brother tried to sabotage my college applications and why he had no idea that his little scheme was already 3 months too late. Before we dive into this mess, drop a comment and tell me, what time are you watching this and where are you from? Because maybe you've also had a family member try to crush your dreams, only to come crawling back when they needed something. Trust me, you're gonna want to hear how this story unfolds. It started last November in our little house on Maple Street in Thornfield, Connecticut. I was sitting at our kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that Dad never fixed, surrounded by college application materials. Common App essays printed in neat stacks, recommendation letters in manila folders, transcripts with my 4.0 GPA highlighted in yellow marker that I was probably too proud of. My brother Kieran walked in, fresh from his shifts at the GameStop in the mall. At 22, he was still living at home after dropping out of State University his sophomore year. Not that there's anything wrong with that path, but Kieran had made it his personal mission to convince everyone that college was a scam and a waste of time, conveniently after he'd partied his way out of his own education. He glanced at my papers with that smirk I'd learned to hate. Still working on those fantasy applications, I see. I kept typing on my laptop, finishing my Yale supplemental essay about overcoming challenges. They're not fantasy applications, Kieran. I have competitive stats. Competitive stats, he repeated, using that mocking tone he'd perfected since we were kids. Natalie, honey, you go to Thornfield High. You know what colleges think of kids from our zip code? They think we're all destined for the local factory or the community college. That's reality. Our mom, Patricia, walked in carrying groceries, her nurse scrub still wrinkled from her double shift at Thornfield General Hospital. She'd been pulling those doubles for months, trying to save money for what she hoped would be my college tuition. "What are you two discussing?" she asked, setting the bags on the counter with a tired sigh. "I'm trying to explain to Nat that she's setting herself up for heartbreak," Kieran said, leaning against the doorframe like he was delivering some profound wisdom. "These Ivy League schools, they're not for people like us. They're for kids from private schools in Manhattan whose parents went there, kids with trust funds and summer houses." I felt that familiar sting in my chest, the one I got whenever someone tried to put a ceiling on my dreams. "Kieran, you don't know what you're talking about. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, says I have a real shot. My test scores are in the 99th percentile. Mrs. Rodriguez has to be encouraging. It's her job," he scoffed. "But she's not going to be there when you get rejection letter after rejection letter and realize you wasted all this time and energy on pipe dreams." Dad chose that moment to come home from his job at the Thornfield Auto Parts store, his hands still stained with grease despite the industrial soap he used. "What's all this about rejection letters?" "Kieran thinks I shouldn't apply to competitive schools," I said quietly, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Dad looked at my application material spread across the table, then at Kieran, then at me. "Well, honey, your brother's been to college. Maybe you should listen to his advice." Been to college for 2 years before flunking out. But I didn't say that. I never said things like that because I'd learned early that being the good kid meant swallowing your words when they might hurt someone's feelings, even when that someone was busy stumping all over yours. I stared at these three people who were supposed to believe in me more than anyone else in the world and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but definitely crack.
I understand your concerns, I said carefully, using the diplomatic voice I'd perfected in student government. But I've worked really hard for this. My grades, my test scores, my extracurriculars, they mean something. Kieran shook his head like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. They mean something at Thornfield High, Nat, but out there, in the real world, you're just another small-town kid with big dreams and no connections. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my small bedroom, listening to the sounds of our house settling around me. The pipes creaking, the neighbor's dog barking, Kieran playing video games too loudly downstairs. And I made a decision that would change everything. But I had no idea that my brother was about to make a decision of his own. One that would nearly destroy everything I'd worked for, except for one crucial detail he didn't know about. A detail that would make his betrayal backfire in ways he never could have imagined. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pattern had been building for years, but I was too close to see it clearly until that November night. Growing up in the Hartwell household meant understanding your role. Kieran was the charming one, the athlete who could make Dad laugh with stories from his high school football glory days. Even after he dropped out of college, even after he moved back home with no real plan, he was still figuring himself out and exploring his options. I was the responsible one, the one who never caused problems, the one who got good grades because that's what good daughters do, but not so good that it made anyone uncomfortable. Except somewhere along the way, my grades became really good, and then exceptional, and then the kind that made guidance counselors pull me aside and whisper about possibilities I'd never dared to consider. But our family didn't talk about possibilities. We talked about being practical. Every Sunday dinner was the same ritual. Mom would ask about school, and I'd mention honor roll or a test score or some academic achievement. There would be a polite nod, maybe a, "That's nice, honey." And then the conversation would inevitably drift to Kieran's latest job interview or his thoughts on whether he might go back to school someday. When I made National Honor Society junior year, Mom put the certificate on the refrigerator for exactly 3 days before it got buried under grocery lists and Kieran's work schedule. When I scored a 1570 on my SATs, a score that made Mrs. Rodriguez literally gasp and hug me in her office, the family celebration lasted about 30 seconds before Dad started worrying about how much college applications were going to cost. "Those test scores don't mean anything if we can't afford to send you anywhere," he said, which became his favorite refrain whenever my achievements came up. But Kieran's perspective was different. While Mom and Dad worried about money, Kieran seemed to worry about something entirely else. He had this way of deflating my excitement that was so subtle, so wrapped in concern, that it took me years to recognize it as sabotage. When I got excited about a college fair at school, "Natalie, those admissions people are just doing their job. They have to act interested in everyone." When I mentioned wanting to major in international relations, "That's not really a practical degree, is it? What kind of job do you get with that?" When Mrs. Rodriguez suggested I consider applying to reach schools, "Guidance counselors get bonuses when their students apply to prestigious schools. She's not thinking about your feelings when you get rejected." He had an answer for everything, a reason why every opportunity wasn't quite what it seemed, a gentle way of lowering the ceiling on my dreams that felt like protection, but was really something much darker. The worst part was how reasonable he sounded, how much he seemed to genuinely care about protecting me from disappointment. Our parents bought into it completely because Kieran had already been to college. He was the expert on how these things worked. But I started to notice things that didn't add up. Like how Kieran's discouragement got more intense whenever I received positive feedback. When my AP English teacher nominated me for a state writing competition, Kieran spent 20 minutes explaining how these competitions were basically meaningless and just ways for schools to make themselves look good.
They're good enough for state schools, I told them, watching Kieran nod approvingly. See? I told you you were smart, he said. State schools are great options, much more realistic. But late at night, alone in my room, I researched those reach schools anyway. I read about their programs, their campuses, their opportunities. I calculated my chances using online admissions calculators that made my heart race with possibility. And slowly, carefully, I started to plan. The dynamic in our house was so established that nobody questioned it anymore. Kieran was the voice of reason, Mom and Dad were the practical parents keeping everyone's feet on the ground, and I was the dreamy kid who needed constant reality checks. When college application season officially started senior year, this dynamic became even more pronounced. Every time I mentioned a school that wasn't within driving distance of Thornfield, Kieran had statistics about how impossible admission was, how expensive it would be, how I'd be lost at such a big competitive place. "You're a big fish in a small pond here," he'd say. "At places like that, you just be another face in the crowd." Mom would nod along. "He's right, sweetheart. You've worked so hard to be special here. Why risk that?" It was suffocating in the gentlest possible way. Death by 1,000 small discouragements, each one delivered with love and concern and the absolute certainty that they knew what was best for me. But what they didn't know was that their realistic, protective, small-town wisdom had created something unexpected in me. Not resentment, I wasn't angry enough for that yet. Something quieter and more dangerous. Determination. Secret, burning, unstoppable determination. While they were busy managing my expectations downward, I was privately building a plan that would either vindicate everything I believed about myself or destroy me completely. I just had no idea that Kieran was building a plan of his own. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in early December, 2 weeks before regular decision deadlines. I was in my room, finalizing my application to Columbia University. The essay was perfect. I'd rewritten it 7 times. My recommendation letters were stellar. My transcript showed not a single B in 4 years of high school. Everything was ready to submit. I could hear my family downstairs having dinner without me, something that had become routine during application season. Mom would call me down, I'd say I was working on homework, and they'd eat without me rather than interrupt my studying. They had no idea I was crafting applications to 8 of the most competitive schools in the country. That's when Kieran knocked on my door. "Nat, can I come in? I brought you a sandwich." I minimized my browser window and opened my AP Physics textbook, creating the illusion that I'd been studying for my upcoming exam. "Sure, come in." He entered carrying a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut diagonally, just the way I liked it. This was classic Kieran. These little gestures of thoughtfulness that made you forget about the constant discouragement. "Thanks," I said, taking the plate. "I'm just reviewing for Henderson's physics test." Kieran sat on the edge of my bed, glancing at my laptop. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said the other night about college applications." My stomach tensed. We hadn't talked about colleges in weeks, mostly because I'd learned to avoid the topic entirely. "What about them?" "Well, I realized I might have been too discouraging. Maybe you should apply to a few reach schools after all." He smiled that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble our entire childhood. "I mean, what's the worst that could happen, right? You get a rejection letter and move on." I stared at him, trying to process this sudden shift. "Really?" "Really. In fact, I was thinking I could help you. You know, look over your applications, help you polish them up. I did get into state university after all. I know what admissions committees are looking for." Every instinct I'd developed over 17 years of living with Kieran started screaming warnings. This wasn't like him. The brother who'd spent months convincing me to aim low was suddenly offering to help me reach higher. But I was 17, desperate for family support and exhausted from carrying this burden alone. But that would actually be really helpful, I heard myself saying. His smile widened. Great. Why don't you show me what you've been working on? I hesitated for just a moment. Then I reopened my laptop and turned the screen toward him. I've been working on Columbia. It's due in 2 weeks. Kieran leaned forward, scanning my application with what looked like genuine interest. Wow, Nat, this is really impressive. Your essay is... He paused, reading silently. This is really good writing. For the first time in months, I felt that warm glow of family approval. You think so? I know so. And your activities list, student government president, NHS officer, varsity debate team captain, when did you become such an overachiever? He was grinning, but it felt supportive rather than mocking. I've been busy, I said, feeling my cheeks heat up. Clearly. And your grades. Jesus, Natalie, a 4.0? I had no idea you were doing this well. The validation felt like sunlight after months of clouds. This is what I'd been craving. Someone in my family recognizing what I'd accomplished, seeing my potential instead of just the risks. But the thing is, Kieran continued, applications like this need to be perfect. One small mistake and admissions committees will toss them aside. These schools get tens of thousands of applications. I know. I've been really careful.
I'm sure you have. But you know what? Let me take this home tonight. I'll go through everything with fresh eyes, maybe catch some things you missed. Sometimes it takes someone with college experience to spot the subtle issues. That warning voice got louder. But looking at Kieran's earnest face, his apparent genuine desire to help, I pushed the doubt aside. You don't have to do that. I know you're busy with work. Nat, you're my sister. This is important. Besides, I feel bad about all the discouraging things I said before. Let me make it up to you. He was already reaching for my laptop. I'll have it back to you tomorrow night, okay? With notes on how to make it even stronger. I watched him close my laptop and tuck it under his arm. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? Family support? Someone who believed in me? Just be careful with it, okay? That application represents months of work. Of course. He paused at my doorway. And Nat, don't mention this to Mom and Dad yet. Let's wait until we've got everything perfect. No point in getting their hopes up until we know you've got the best possible shot. That made sense. Our parents were already worried about the cost of college applications. Better to present them with a polished, competitive application than a work in progress. After he left, I sat on my bed feeling strangely empty. I'd been working on that Columbia application for weeks. Having it out of my hands felt like missing a limb. But Kieran was right. An outside perspective could only help. And the fact that he'd finally recognized my achievements, finally seemed to believe in my potential, was worth the temporary discomfort. The next day at school dragged by. I kept thinking about my laptop, wondering what improvements Kieran was making. Maybe he'd help me strengthen my personal statement. Maybe he'd suggest better ways to phrase my accomplishments. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped me in the hallway between classes. Natalie, how are those applications coming? We're getting close to deadlines. Good, I said. Really good. My brother is actually helping me polish them up. She raised an eyebrow. Your brother? Kieran? Yeah, he offered to look them over with fresh eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. That's nice of him. Just remember, these applications need to be in your voice, okay? Admissions committees can tell when someone else has heavily edited an essay. Of course, he's just checking for errors, things like that. But something in her expression made me uncomfortable. Mrs. Rodriguez had been my guidance counselor for 4 years. She knew my family dynamics better than most. That evening, Kieran knocked on my door again. But this time, he didn't come in. He just handed me my laptop through the crack in the door. All set, he said. I made some notes in the margins of your essay.
Really good work, Nat. What kind of changes did you suggest? Nothing major, just some tweaks to make your voice sound more mature, more college-ready. You'll see. He was already walking away. Kieran, wait! But he was gone, heading down the hallway to his room. I opened my laptop eagerly, ready to see his suggestions. The Columbia application was still open in my browser, but something looked different. My personal statement, the essay I'd crafted and refined over months, was completely rewritten. Not edited, rewritten, in a voice that sounded nothing like me. My activities list had been changed too. Leadership positions downgraded, accomplishments minimized. My debate team captaincy was now listed as member. My student government presidency was described as participant. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the application. Every section had been systematically weakened, my academic achievements buried in modest language, my passion projects described in the most mundane terms possible. And then I saw the submission button. It was grayed out because the application had already been submitted. With shaking hands, I clicked on my application history. There it was. Columbia University, application submitted December 10th, 11:47 p.m. Last night, while I was sleeping. Kieran hadn't helped me improve my application. He had sabotaged it and submitted it without my knowledge, ensuring that Columbia would see a mediocre candidate instead of the competitive applicant I actually was. I sat staring at the screen for I don't know how long, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. My brother, who I'd trusted, who I believed finally supported me, had deliberately destroyed months of work. But as the shock wore off, a different feeling took its place. Not the crushing devastation Kieran probably expected. Something much more dangerous. Because what Kieran didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten an email that changed everything. An email that made his little sabotage completely irrelevant. An email that would turn his betrayal into the biggest mistake he ever made. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Kieran's deception. The sandwich, the sudden change of heart, the way he'd complimented my work right before destroying it. The worst part wasn't even the sabotage itself. It was how perfectly he'd played me. How easily I'd handed over months of work to someone who'd spent years systematically undermining my confidence. I felt stupid, naive, like the little sister who would always fall for her big brother's tricks. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him, not yet.
I went downstairs for breakfast like nothing had happened. Kieran was already there, eating cereal and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered the kitchen. "How did the Columbia revisions look?" he asked casually. "I think I really helped strengthen your application." I poured myself orange juice with steady hands. "Yeah, thanks for the help." Mom looked up from packing her lunch for another double shift. "What revisions?" "Kieran helped me polish up one of my college applications," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "That was sweet of him," Mom said, ruffling Kieran's hair as she passed. "It's nice to see you two supporting each other." Kieran smiled that charming smile, just being a good big brother. I excused myself and went to school, where I immediately sought out Mrs. Rodriguez. "I need to know about application deadlines," I told her. "If someone submitted an application incorrectly, is there any way to fix it?" She frowned. "What happened?" I explained about Kieran's help without mentioning the sabotage directly. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Natalie, colleges are very strict about application integrity. If an application was submitted with false information or without your consent, that's a serious problem. We need to contact Columbia immediately." But when we called Columbia's admissions office, the news was worse than I had expected. Not only was there no way to retract or modify a submitted application, but attempting to submit a second application would result in both applications being automatically rejected. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez said after we hung up. Columbia was your top choice, wasn't it? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What about your other applications? Please tell me you haven't let anyone else review them. That's when the full scope of my situation hit me. I'd been so focused on crafting the perfect applications that I'd only completed 3 so far: Columbia, Yale, and Northwestern. Columbia was sabotaged. The other 2 were sitting in my drafts, incomplete. And Kieran knew about all of them. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said slowly, I need to finish my other applications immediately, and I can't do it at home. She understood without explanation. You can use my office after school, every day if you need to. We'll get this figured out. The next few weeks were torture. I stayed after school every day, working frantically to complete applications while maintaining the pretense at home that everything was fine. I lived in constant fear that Kieran would ask to help with other applications, but he didn't. He seemed satisfied with whatever damage he had done to Columbia. He was almost cheerful. He started asking about my college plans with fake concern, suggesting community colleges and local state schools with renewed enthusiasm. You know, Nat, I've been thinking, maybe Columbia was aiming too high anyway. There are some great communications programs at regional schools, much more realistic. I just nodded and agreed. It was easier than fighting. Meanwhile, I was living a double life. At school, Mrs. Rodriguez and I worked like we were defusing a bomb, rush applications to every competitive school that would still accept them, craft new essays in record time, submit everything before Kieran could interfere again. At home, I pretended to be the deflated, realistic version of myself that my family expected. I stopped talking about colleges entirely. When mail came from universities, I intercepted it before anyone else could see it. When Mrs. Rodriguez called the house, I made sure I answered the phone. The psychological toll was enormous. I felt like I was living in enemy territory, constantly vigilant, constantly performing. Some nights I'd lay awake wondering if Kieran was right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe his sabotage actually saved me from a more devastating rejection. The doubt was the worst part. It crept in during quiet moments, whispering that maybe settling for less was actually wisdom. Maybe my family's low expectations were protection, not limitations. I started having dreams about college rejection letters, stacks and stacks of them, all citing the same reason. We regret to inform you that your application did not meet our standards. In the dreams, Kieran would be standing behind me, reading over my shoulder, saying, I told you so, with that gentle, reasonable voice. But there were also moments of clarity. Usually late at night in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, working by the light of her desk lamp, I'd remember who I really was. The girl who'd never gotten a B, who'd won state competitions, who'd scored in the 99th percentile on standardized tests. Those moments kept me going. Christmas break arrived like a temporary ceasefire. No school meant no refuge in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, but it also meant no immediate pressure to maintain my performance at home. I spent most of the break in my room, supposedly reading for pleasure, but actually researching backup plans. What if none of my applications worked out? What if Kieran's sabotage had somehow contaminated everything else? I needed to be prepared for every possibility. On New Year's Eve, while my family watched the ball drop, I sat in my room calculating the cost of gap year programs. If the worst happened, I could take a year off, work, save money, and reapply. It wasn't ideal, but it was a plan. Kieran knocked on my door just after midnight. "Happy New Year, sis." "Happy New Year," I replied. "You know, I'm proud of you for being so mature about the college thing. Not everyone can handle disappointment as well as you have."
I looked at him standing in my doorway, genuinely believing he'd done me a favor, that he'd saved me from heartbreak by sabotaging my dreams before anyone else could. Thanks, Kieran. That means a lot. After he left, I sat in the dark thinking about that conversation. He was proud of me for handling disappointment, proud of me for giving up, proud of me for becoming smaller, quieter, more manageable. That's when I realized something that would sustain me through the next few months. I wasn't handling disappointment at all. I was planning a comeback. January brought a new kind of torture.
Waiting. Application deadlines had passed. Regular decision notifications wouldn't come until March. I had months of limbo ahead of me, months of pretending everything was fine while internally screaming. But I'd also learned something valuable during those weeks of secret application work. I was stronger than I'd thought, more resourceful, more determined. And I had something Kieran didn't know about, something that made all his careful sabotage irrelevant. The secret that would turn his betrayal into the biggest strategic error of his life. I just had to wait a little longer to reveal it. February arrived with a fresh layer of snow and an unexpected phone call that would change everything. I was in my room doing homework when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Usually I'd let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello, is this Natalie Hartwell? Yes, this is she. This is Jennifer Caldwell from Harvard University Admissions. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. My heart stopped, literally stopped. I sat down hard on my bed, suddenly dizzy. No, not at all. Is everything okay with my application? There was a warm laugh on the other end. Everything is more than okay. I'm calling because we need to discuss your enrollment deposit. The deadline is approaching and we haven't received your commitment yet. I stared at the wall, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. I haven't heard back about my admission status yet. Silence. On the other end. Then, Natalie, you were accepted through our early action program in December. Your acceptance letter and enrollment packet were sent to your home address on December 15th. Didn't you receive them? December 15th. 3 days after Kieran had sabotaged my Columbia application. 3 days after he'd convinced me that my dreams were unrealistic fantasies. No, I never received any letter from Harvard. More silence. That's very concerning. Let me check our records. Yes, everything was sent to 847 Maple Street, Thornfield, Connecticut. That's correct, isn't it? Yes, that's my address. Well, this is unusual. Mail doesn't typically just disappear. But regardless, the important thing is that you're accepted. And we need your enrollment decision by March 1st. That's less than 2 weeks away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Ms. Caldwell, could you tell me exactly what the letter said? I just want to make sure I understand everything correctly. Of course. Let me pull up your file. I heard typing in the background. Here we are. Dear Natalie, the Committee on Admissions has asked me to inform you that you have been admitted to the class of 2028. The committee was impressed by your exceptional academic record, your leadership in student government and debate, and particularly your personal essay about overcoming socioeconomic barriers to pursue academic excellence. I was crying now, but silently, not wanting her to hear. This was real. Harvard had accepted me. Harvard had been trying to reach me for 2 months while I'd been drowning in self-doubt and family sabotage. Ms. Caldwell, I need to ask you something, and I hope this doesn't sound strange, but is there any way to verify when exactly the letter was delivered? There might have been some family complications. Another pause. Actually, yes. We use certified mail for acceptance letters, so there would be a delivery confirmation. Let me check with our mailroom. Can I call you back in about an hour? Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. After she hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Harvard. I'd gotten into Harvard. The school Kieran had convinced me was so far out of reach that even applying was delusional. Not only had I been accepted, but they'd been trying to reach me for 2 months while I'd been drowning in self-doubt and family sabotage. The phone rang exactly an hour later. Natalie, this is Jennifer again. I have the delivery information. The letter was delivered and signed for on December 15th at 2:47 p.m. The signature on file is, let me see, it looks like K. Hartwell. K. Hartwell. My brother hadn't just sabotaged my Columbia application. He'd intercepted my Harvard acceptance letter. For 2 months, he'd been sitting on the news that I had achieved exactly what he'd convinced everyone was impossible.
Miss Caldwell, I need to be completely honest with you. I never saw that letter. Someone else in my household has been intercepting my mail. This is the first I'm hearing about my acceptance. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. I'm so sorry, Natalie. No wonder we haven't heard from you. Is it too late? Can I still accept?
Absolutely. Given these circumstances, we can definitely work with you on the deadline. But I do need to know, are you still interested in attending Harvard? I started laughing. Not polite laughter, but the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and desperate. Miss Caldwell, Harvard has been my dream school since I was 14 years old. Yes, I am very much still interested. After we worked out the details of my acceptance and enrollment, I hung up and sat in my room, staring at my phone. Everything I thought I knew about the last 2 months had been a lie. While I'd been struggling with self-doubt, thinking maybe my family was right about my limitations, I'd actually already achieved something extraordinary. I'd gotten to Harvard on my own merit, despite everything. But Kieran had hidden that success from me, letting me believe I was the delusional dreamer he'd always said I was. The rage hit me like a physical force. Not the quick anger that flares and fades, but something deeper, colder, more calculating. I went to my computer and started searching through my email, looking for anything else that might have been intercepted. That's when I found them. Dozens of emails that had been automatically sorted into a folder I never checked. Emails from Yale, from Northwestern, from Princeton, all asking about missing documents, wondering about my continued interest, requesting responses to time-sensitive communications. Kieran hadn't just intercepted my Harvard letter, he'd been systematically sabotaging my entire college process for months. Redirecting emails, intercepting mail, ensuring that I looked unresponsive and uninterested to every school I'd applied to. I called Mrs. Rodriguez immediately, even though it was almost 8 p.m. Natalie, is everything okay? Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to tell you something, and I need your help figuring out what to do about it. I told her everything. The Harvard acceptance, the intercepted mail, the redirected emails, the systematic sabotage that went far beyond just editing one application. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then, Natalie, this isn't just sibling rivalry. This is criminal. He's been committing mail fraud. He's been sabotaging your future. I know, but what do I do now? How do I handle this? First, we're going to contact every school you applied to and explain what happened. Most of them will be understanding, especially with documentation. Second, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And third, she paused. Third, you need to decide how you want to handle this with your family. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't from despair. It was from a kind of electric energy I'd never felt before. For months, I'd been the victim in this story. The naive little sister who trusted too much and aimed too high. The disappointing daughter who couldn't handle reality. But that version of events had been carefully constructed by someone who needed me to fail. Someone who'd been so threatened by my success that he'd committed actual crimes to prevent it. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the delusional dreamer. I was the girl who'd gotten to Harvard despite systematic sabotage. I was the girl who'd been so impressive that admissions committees were calling to make sure I was still interested. I was everything I'd believed myself to be, and more. And Kieran? Kieran had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because now I knew exactly what he'd done. I had documentation. I had witnesses. I had a Harvard acceptance letter that proved every cruel thing he'd said about my abilities was not just wrong, but deliberately malicious. The question now wasn't whether I could achieve my dreams. I'd already done that. The question was what I was going to do to the person who tried so hard to stop me. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Not the emotional, confrontational plan that 17-year-old me wanted to execute, storming downstairs and screaming at Kieran until the neighbors called the police. No, I'd learned something valuable from watching his calculated manipulation over the years. The most devastating moves are the ones nobody sees coming. I started with documentation.
While my family ate breakfast downstairs, I methodically screenshotted every redirected email, every missed deadline notification, every follow-up message from universities asking why I hadn't responded to their communications. I created a folder on my laptop called Evidence and began building a case that would make any prosecutor jealous. At school, Mrs. Rodriguez and I spent her free period making phone calls. The first was to Yale. "This is unusual," the admissions officer said after I explained the situation, "but we do have policies for extenuating circumstances. If you can provide documentation of mail fraud, we can extend your response deadline." Northwestern was even more understanding. "We've seen cases like this before. Family sabotage of college applications is more common than people realize. We'll definitely work with you." Princeton was the most surprising. "Actually," the admissions officer said, "we've been trying to reach you for weeks about your merit scholarship interview. We thought you'd lost interest in our program." Merit scholarship for Princeton. I hung up the phone and looked at Mrs. Rodriguez with tears in my eyes. "They want to interview me for a merit scholarship, and I almost missed it because of him." "How much money are we talking about?" she asked gently. "Full tuition? 4 years? $160,000.
Mrs. Rodriguez sat back in her chair. Natalie, your brother didn't just intercept mail. He potentially cost you over $150,000 in scholarship money. That afternoon, I received an email that made my hands shake. It was from Harvard's financial aid office, forwarded by Jennifer Caldwell. "Dear Natalie, we've been attempting to reach you regarding your need-based financial aid package. Based on your family's reported income, you qualify for our full need-based grant program. This means your entire Harvard education, tuition, room, board, and books will be covered at no cost to your family. Please contact us immediately to confirm your acceptance of this package." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. Full ride to Harvard. Everything paid for. My family spent my entire childhood worrying about college costs, with Dad constantly saying we couldn't afford prestigious schools. Meanwhile, I'd qualified for a completely free education at the most prestigious school in the country, and my brother had hidden that information from everyone. That evening at dinner, Kieran was particularly chatty. "So, Nat, have you heard back from any schools yet?" he asked, cutting his meatloaf with theatrical concern. "I know you were really hoping for good news." I looked at him across the table. This person who'd shared a house with me for 17 years, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd once punched Tommy Brennan in middle school for making fun of my braces. This person who'd been systematically destroying my future while pretending to care about my well-being. "Not yet," I said calmly. "You know how these things work. Sometimes mail gets delayed." "Well, don't get too discouraged if the news isn't what you hoped for," Mom said, reaching over to pat my hand. "Community college is nothing to be ashamed of. Kieran's friend Mark is doing really well in the automotive program." Kieran nodded sagely. "Sometimes the universe has a way of guiding us toward the right path, even when it's not the path we originally wanted." I excused myself from dinner and went to my room, where I called the one person I trusted completely. "Grandma, it's Natalie. I need to talk to someone, and I need advice." My grandmother lived 3 hours away in Burlington, but she'd always been my refuge during family drama. She was Dad's mother, sharp as a tack at 78, and the only person in my extended family who'd ever suggested I might be destined for something bigger than Thornfield. I told her everything: the sabotage, the intercepted mail, the Harvard acceptance, and the scholarship opportunities I'd nearly missed. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of amazement or disgust. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Natalie, honey, what your brother did isn't just cruel, it's criminal. But more importantly, it tells you something about who he really is.
Someone who would sabotage their own sister's future isn't someone who deserves your protection. But he's family, and maybe he thought he was protecting me from disappointment. No, her voice was firm. Don't you dare make excuses for him. He didn't intercept that Harvard letter to protect you. He did it because your success threatened him. Because if his little sister could get into Harvard, what did that say about his own failures? That hit like a physical blow. Because it was true. What do I do, Grandma? You document everything, you protect yourself, and then you show them exactly who you really are. The next day brought another revelation. I was checking my email during lunch when I found a message that had been sitting in my spam folder for weeks. It was from a local newspaper, the Thornfield Tribune. Dear Miss Hartwell, we're writing a feature story about local students who have achieved academic excellence this year. Your guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, nominated you as someone who has overcome significant obstacles to achieve at the highest level. We'd love to interview you about your college acceptances and future plans. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. The email was dated January 20th, over a month ago. I showed it to Mrs. Rodriguez during our afternoon meeting. She said, I nominated you because you deserve recognition, but also because I thought a newspaper article might help with college applications. I had no idea about the Harvard situation then. Should I respond to them now? She smiled. Natalie, you're about to be a Harvard student with a full scholarship. I think they'll still be very interested in that story. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called the newspaper back. This is Jake Morrison from the Tribune. Thanks for getting back to me about the feature story. I'm sorry for the delayed response. There were some family complications with my mail. No problem at all. So Mrs. Rodriguez tells me you've had some impressive college acceptances this year? I took a deep breath. Well, I was accepted to Harvard University with a full need-based scholarship. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm sorry, did you say Harvard? With a full scholarship? Yes, and I'm also being considered for merit scholarships of Princeton and Northwestern. This is incredible. You realize you're probably the first Thornfield High School student to get into Harvard in over a decade? Actually, I hadn't realized that, but it explained a lot about my family's reaction. We'd love to do a front-page feature on this. Local girl makes it to the Ivy League despite the odds. It's exactly the kind of story our readers love.
After we scheduled the interview, I hung up and sat in my room, thinking about what was about to happen. Once that article came out, everyone in town would know about my Harvard acceptance. My parents would know. My extended family would know. And Kieran would know that I knew. The thought should have scared me. For months, I'd been living in fear of his manipulation, walking on eggshells, trying not to provoke him. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. Because while Kieran had been busy sabotaging my applications, I'd been getting accepted anyway. While he'd been intercepting my mail, admissions committees had been so impressed with my work that they'd been actively trying to recruit me. His entire campaign of psychological warfare was built on a lie. The lie that I wasn't good enough, that my dreams were unrealistic, that failure was inevitable. But Harvard University, Princeton, Northwestern, and Yale all disagreed without assessment, and soon everyone would know it. The newspaper interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at our house. I chose that timing deliberately. Kieran would be home from work, Mom would be between her day and evening shifts, and Dad would have just gotten back from the auto parts store. Perfect timing for maximum impact. I spent Wednesday night preparing, not just for the interview questions, but for what would come after. I printed copies of all the documentation I'd gathered, the Harvard acceptance email, the financial aid package, the scholarship opportunities, the evidence of intercepted mail. I organized everything in a folder that told a complete story. Thursday morning, I woke up feeling different, calmer, like I'd been holding my breath for months and was finally ready to exhale.
At school, Mrs. Rodriguez pulled me aside during lunch. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once that interview happens, there's no going back. I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it, I told her. The journalist, Jake Morrison, arrived at 4 p.m. sharp. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 20s, with the kind of eager energy that made me think he saw this story as his ticket to a bigger paper. My family gathered in the living room with the uncomfortable politeness they reserved for visitors. Kieran sat on the couch next to Mom, looking curious and slightly confused. Dad had taken his spot in the recliner, still in his work clothes. "So, Natalie," Jake began, setting up his recording device on the coffee table, "Mrs. Rodriguez tells me you've had some exceptional college acceptances this year. Can you tell me about them?" I looked around the room at my family's expectant faces. Mom was smiling that proud but cautious smile she wore when she wasn't sure if she should be celebrating yet. Dad looked skeptical, like he was waiting for the catch. Kieran looked interested, like he was curious to see how I'd spin my inevitable disappointments into something newsworthy. Well, I was accepted to Harvard University with a full need-based financial aid package. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the old house seemed to stop creaking. Jake leaned forward. "Harvard University? That's incredible. When did you find out?" "That's an interesting question," I said, glancing at Kieran. "According to Harvard's records, my acceptance letter was delivered on December 15th at 2:47 p.m. Mom's face went white. "What do you mean you didn't know?" I reached for my folder and pulled out the delivery confirmation. The letter was signed for by K. Hartwell on December 15th at 2:47 p.m. I handed the paper to Mom, watching as her eyes scanned the document. Dad looked confused. "K. Hartwell? That's not you." "No, it's not." I turned to look directly at Kieran. "It's Kieran." The color drained from my brother's face so quickly, I thought he might faint. "Nat, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm also being considered for a full merit scholarship at Princeton. The interview was supposed to happen 2 weeks ago, but I never received the notification, just like I never received the follow-up emails from Yale or the financial aid information from Northwestern or the honors program invitation from Brown." Jake was scribbling furiously in his notebook. This was turning into a much bigger story than a simple college acceptance feature. Mom was staring at Kieran with an expression I'd never seen before. "Kieran, please tell me you didn't." "Mom, she's obviously confused," Kieran started. "I have copies of all the intercepted emails," I said, pulling out a thick stack of papers. They were redirected to a folder I didn't normally check. Dozens of them. Universities trying to contact me about scholarships, financial aid, program opportunities. All of it hidden from me. Dad leaned forward in his recliner. "Natalie, are you saying your brother intercepted your college mail?" "I'm saying Kieran has been systematically sabotaging my college applications for months. He edited and submitted my Columbia application without my permission, making it deliberately weak. He intercepted my Harvard acceptance letter and let me believe I was delusional for even applying there. He redirected emails so I'd miss scholarship deadlines and interview opportunities." I turned to Jake, who was looking between me and my family with the expression of a journalist who'd stumbled onto something much bigger than expected.
The Harvard financial aid package alone is worth over $200,000, I continued. The Princeton scholarship I almost missed is worth $160,000. My brother's sabotage didn't just hurt my feelings, it nearly cost our family hundreds of thousands of dollars in educational opportunities. Kieran finally found his voice. "This is insane! Natalie, you're being paranoid." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and opened my email. "Jake, would you like me to call Harvard right now? They're expecting my enrollment confirmation. Or we could call Princeton about the merit scholarship interview that I'm now scheduled for next week." "You're serious?" Mom whispered. "Harvard actually accepted you?" "With full financial aid," I confirmed. "Everything paid for. Tuition, room, board, books. The financial worry that's kept Dad awake for months, it was solved in December. We just never knew because Kieran made sure we didn't know." Dad stood up from his recliner, his face red with an anger I'd rarely seen.
Kieran Michael Hartwell, did you steal your sister's mail? I was trying to protect her. Kieran finally exploded. She was setting herself up for heartbreak. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your little sister aim so high that she's guaranteed to get crushed? But she didn't get crushed. She got accepted to Harvard. That's not the point. Kieran was standing now too, his careful composure completely shattered. The point is that she shouldn't have even tried. We're not Harvard people. We're not Ivy League people. She needed to learn to be realistic. Realistic about what? I asked, standing to face him. About my 4.0 GPA? About my 1570 SAT score? About the fact that I'm apparently the first Thornfield student to get into Harvard in over a decade? Jake looked up from his notes. First in over a decade? Really? According to the admissions office, yes, which makes Kieran's sabotage even more remarkable. He worked so hard to prevent something that was already historic. Mom was crying now, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of realization, understanding how badly they'd all misjudged the situation and how much damage had been done. All those months, she whispered, all those months you seemed so defeated, so resigned. We thought you were finally being realistic, but you were actually just heartbroken. I was destroyed, I said simply. I believed what you all told me, that I was delusional, that I was setting myself up for disappointment, that I should aim lower. And all that time, I had already achieved something extraordinary, and my own family was hiding it from me. Kieran slumped back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I thought I was protecting you. No, you didn't, and my voice was steady as steel. You were protecting yourself. Because if your dropout little sister could get into Harvard, what did that say about your own choices? About your own failures? The room fell silent, except for the sound of Jake's pen moving across his notebook. So, what happens now? Dad asked quietly. Now, I go to Harvard, on a full scholarship, and I stop pretending that aiming high is something I should apologize for. I looked around the room at my family, Mom crying, Dad processing, Kieran broken on the couch. The interview is over, I told Jake. I think you have everything you need for your story. After Jake left, promising to send me a copy before publication, I sat in the kitchen with the documentation spread across the table. My family was silent in the living room, trying to process everything that had just happened. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about Harvard. About the opportunities that were waiting for me, about the future that had always been possible even when everyone told me it wasn't. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The article came out on Sunday morning, front page of the Thornfield Tribune with the headline, Local Student Overcomes Family Sabotage to Achieve Harvard Dreams. Kieran Morrison had done his homework. The article detailed not just my acceptances and scholarships, but the systematic nature of Kieran's interference. He'd interviewed Mrs. Rodriguez, who spoke about the unprecedented nature of academic sabotage within a family. He even gotten a quote from Harvard's admissions office about how rare it was for acceptance notifications to be intercepted. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters from regional papers wanted follow-up interviews. A producer from the local TV news station wanted to schedule a segment. The principal of Thornfield High called to congratulate me and ask if I'd be willing to speak at graduation. But the most surprising call came from someone I hadn't expected. Natalie, this is Dean Richardson from Thornfield Community College. I'm calling about your brother, Kieran. My stomach dropped. What about him? Well, he's been taking evening classes here for the past 2 years trying to complete his degree. But this morning, he came to my office and said he wanted to withdraw from all his courses. He seemed quite distraught. I was hoping you might know what's going on. I looked across the living room where Kieran sat hunched over his laptop, furiously typing. He'd been like that since the article came out, barely speaking to anyone, refusing to come to breakfast or lunch. Dean Richardson, I think my brother is dealing with some personal issues right now, but withdrawing from school probably isn't the answer.
That's what I tried to tell him. He's actually been doing well in his classes. Not spectacular, but steady improvement. It would be a shame for him to give up now.
After I hung up, I walked over to where Kieran was sitting. His laptop screen showed job application websites, dozens of tabs open for positions in other cities. Phoenix, Denver, Portland, all places far from Thornfield. Running away? I asked. He didn't look up. What's the point of staying? Everyone in town knows what I did now. I'll never live this down. So you're just going to abandon your degree? Again? That made him look up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. What degree, Natalie? I'm 22 years old, living at home, working retail, taking community college classes at night. I'm a failure, and now everyone knows that the successful person in this family was always you. I sat down in the chair across from him. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anger toward my brother. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like pity. Kieran, you sabotaging me doesn't make you more successful, and me succeeding doesn't make you a failure. Doesn't it? He laughed bitterly. My little sister is going to Harvard. My little sister got a full ride to the most prestigious university in the world. Meanwhile, I'm applying to be a night manager at Target in Phoenix because I can't face the people in this town. You could face them if you made different choices. He closed his laptop and leaned back against the couch. Like what, go back to community college and pretend the last 3 days didn't happen? Pretend everyone isn't talking about how I tried to destroy my own sister's future? You could start by apologizing. To me, to mom and dad, to yourself. Would that fix anything? I thought about that question seriously. No, it wouldn't fix the months of psychological damage you caused. It wouldn't give me back the confidence you systematically destroyed. It wouldn't undo the fact that I almost missed scholarship opportunities worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because of your interference. Kieran flinched at each point, but I wasn't done. But it would be a start. It would be acknowledgement that what you did was wrong. And it might help you figure out why you did it. I know why I did it. I was jealous. I was scared. I was watching my little sister achieve things I never could, and instead of being proud, I felt threatened. It was the first honest thing he'd said since this whole mess began. Mom appeared in the doorway, still wearing her nurse scrubs from her overnight shift. She'd been picking up extra hours since the article came out, partly to avoid the attention, but mostly because she was processing her own guilt about the situation. Natalie, there's someone here to see you, she said. I went to the front door and found Mrs. Rodriguez standing on our porch holding a manila envelope and wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen on her face. I have news, she said, practically bouncing with excitement. Princeton called this morning. They want to offer you their presidential scholarship, full ride, plus a stipend for research opportunities. And that's not all. She handed me the envelope. Yale came through with a merit package, too. And Northwestern, and Brown. Natalie, you have full ride offers to 5 Ivy League schools. I opened the envelope and stared at the letters inside, each one representing not just acceptance, but recognition of exceptional merit. Each one proof that everything I'd believed about my potential was not only true, but conservative. How is this possible? I asked. Your story went viral, Mrs. Rodriguez said. The Thornfield Tribune article got picked up by larger papers. Social media is calling you the girl who succeeded despite family sabotage. Universities are actually competing for you now. Through the window, I could see Kieran watching from the living room. His expression wasn't bitter anymore. It was something closer to awe. That evening, our extended family began arriving. Aunt Sarah drove up from New Haven with congratulations flowers. Uncle Pete brought his whole family from Hartford. Even Grandma made the 3-hour drive from Burlington despite having just talked to her on the phone 2 days earlier. The house filled with relatives I hadn't seen since Christmas, all wanting to celebrate and ask questions and understand how something this extraordinary had happened to someone from our family. Harvard, my cousin Amy kept saying. You're actually going to Harvard. With a full scholarship, Uncle Pete added. Do you understand how incredible that is?
But the conversation I remembered most happened quietly in the kitchen while everyone else was celebrating in the living room. Dad found me there, standing by the window and watching the sunset over Thornfield. "Natalie," he said, his voice heavy with something I'd never heard from him before. "I owe you an apology." I turned to face him. Not just for what Kieran did, though God knows that was terrible, but for the way your mother and I reacted to your dreams. We thought we were being practical, but we were being small. We were so afraid of disappointment that we couldn't see your potential. He sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older than his 48 years. "When you were little, you used to talk about changing the world. You'd say you were going to solve problems and help people and make things better. And instead of nurturing that, we spent years trying to convince you to want smaller things." I sat down across from him. "You were trying to protect me."
No, we were trying to protect ourselves from having a daughter whose success made us feel inadequate, from having to face our own limitations. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. "Dad, my success doesn't diminish you. It doesn't mean you failed as a parent or that your life choices were wrong." "Doesn't it? I work at an auto parts store, Natalie. I never finished college. Your mother works double shifts at a hospital. And somehow we raised a daughter who got into Harvard?" "You raised a daughter who learned work ethic from watching you, who learned compassion from watching mom care for people, who learned persistence from watching both of you never give up on your family, even when things were hard." He was quiet for a long time. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "I should have said that more often." As the celebration continued around us, I realized something had fundamentally shifted, not just in my family's perception of me, but in my own understanding of what was possible. The girl who'd spent months believing she was delusional for dreaming big was gone. In her place was someone who knew exactly what she was capable of, and that person was ready for Harvard. 6 months later, I was standing in Harvard Yard during freshman orientation, surrounded by students from every corner of the world, each with their own remarkable story of how they'd arrived at this moment. But I kept thinking about a conversation I'd had the week before leaving for Cambridge. Kieran had knocked on my bedroom door while I was packing. He wasn't carrying a sandwich this time, just a letter in his hands and an expression I'd never seen before: complete humility. "I wrote you something," he said, holding out the envelope. "You don't have to read it now. Or ever, really. But I needed to write it." I took the letter, but didn't open it immediately. "How are the classes going?" He'd decided not to run away to Phoenix after all. Instead, he'd gone back to Dean Richardson and asked to continue his evening program at Thornfield Community College. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. Good, actually. Really good. "I'm taking a psychology class, and we've been talking about self-sabotage and projection. Turns out there's a whole field of study about why people tear down the people closest to them." "And what have you learned?" "That I spent so much energy trying to prevent you from failing that I never actually tried to succeed myself. It was easier to keep you small than to grow myself." I sat down on my bed, still holding his letter. "Kieran, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "When did you stop believing in me? Because you weren't always like this. When we were kids, you used to tell people your little sister was going to be famous someday." His eyes filled with tears. "I never stopped believing in you, Nat. That was the problem. I knew you were extraordinary, and I knew I wasn't, and I couldn't handle the comparison." "So you tried to drag me down instead of lifting yourself up?" "Yeah, and it almost worked." I opened his letter that night after he left. It was 3 pages long, handwritten in the careful script I remembered from when he used to help me with homework. "Natalie, I know saying sorry isn't enough. I know that months of psychological manipulation can't be undone with an apology.
but I need you to understand that what I did had nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with my own insecurity. I convinced myself I was protecting you from disappointment, but I was really protecting myself from having to confront my own choices. Every time you achieved something, it reminded me of everything I had given up on. You getting into Harvard doesn't make me a failure. Me giving up on my dreams made me a failure. And instead of fixing that, I tried to stop you from succeeding. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to be the brother you deserved all along. The one who celebrates your victories instead of fearing them. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. Now, standing in Harvard Yard with that letter tucked in my wallet, I thought about how much had changed since that December night when I discovered his sabotage. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mom. Just saw your interview on the Today Show website. Dad cried. Happy tears. We love you so much. The Today Show interview had happened 2 weeks earlier. They wanted to talk about overcoming family obstacles to achieve academic excellence. I almost turned it down. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't want to be defined forever by what Kieran had done to me. But then I thought about the emails I'd been receiving. Hundreds of them. Students from all over the country sharing their own stories of family sabotage, of dreams discouraged, of potential diminished by the people who were supposed to support them most. One message particularly stayed with me. Natalie, I'm a senior in high school in Ohio. My parents keep telling me I'm not smart enough for pre-med, that I should just go to community college and be realistic. But after reading your story, I applied to State University's honors program anyway. I got in with a scholarship. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the people who love us don't always know what's best for us. Another one read,
I'm 25 and I've been letting my family talk me out of law school for 3 years. They say it's too competitive and I'll just get disappointed. Your story made me realize I've been living their fears instead of my own dreams. I'm taking the LSAT next month. That's when I understood that my story wasn't really about college applications or even family betrayal. It was about something much more fundamental, the right to dream big, even when the people closest to you can't see your potential. During the Today Show interview, the host had asked me what advice I'd give to other students facing family discouragement. First, I'd said, understand that when people try to limit your dreams, it usually says more about their own fears than your abilities. Second, document everything. Save emails, keep records, trust yourself. And third, find at least one person who believes in you. A teacher, a counselor, a friend, someone who can see your potential when you can't see it yourself. What about forgiveness? She'd asked. Have you forgiven your brother? I'd thought about that question for a long time before answering. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process. Kieran is doing the work to understand why he hurt me, and he's making changes in his own life. That matters. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the damage didn't happen or that trust gets automatically restored. And what would you say to him if he's watching right now? I'd looked directly into the camera. I'd say that my success was never a threat to you. There was room for both of us to succeed. There always is. Now, as I walked across Harvard Yard toward my dorm, I thought about that message because it applied to so much more than just sibling relationships. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez. Natalie, I just wanted to check in. How's your first week going? It's incredible, I said, sitting down on a bench under one of the massive elm trees. Challenging, but incredible. I'm so proud of you. You know that, right? I do. And Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you for believing in me when my own family couldn't, for helping me document everything, for making sure I didn't give up. You never needed me to believe in you, Natalie. You just needed someone to reflect back what was already there. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk watching other freshmen hurry across the yard to dinner or study groups or the dozens of activities that make up college life. I thought about the girl who'd sat in her bedroom 8 months ago, believing she was delusional for dreaming of this exact moment.
how she'd almost let other people's fears become her reality. But I also thought about Kieran's latest text, which had come that morning. Nat, I got an A on my psychology midterm. First A I've gotten in anything since high school. Turns out, when you stop spending all your energy tearing other people down, you have a lot more left for building yourself up. The most important lesson I'd learned wasn't about family dynamics or college applications. It was about the difference between protection and limitation. Real protection means creating safe spaces for people to fail and try again. Limitation disguised as protection means convincing people they shouldn't try at all. My family had thought they were protecting me from disappointment, but what they were really doing was protecting themselves from the discomfort of watching someone else succeed where they hadn't. The difference changed everything. As I walked back toward my dorm, I pulled out my phone and opened a new text message to Kieran. Got your psychology grade update. I'm proud of you for doing the work on your classes and on yourself. See you at Thanksgiving. Because here's what I'd learned. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let someone else's worst moments define your future. My brother tried to sabotage my dreams, but he didn't succeed. Not because I was stronger than his manipulation, but because dreams that are truly yours can survive almost anything. Even the people who are supposed to love you most trying to convince you they're impossible. To everyone watching this who's been told their dreams are too big, too unrealistic, too ambitious, your dreams are not the problem. The people trying to shrink them are. Trust yourself, document everything, find your allies, and never, ever apologize for wanting extraordinary things. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe in yourself when no one else will. Have you ever had family members try to protect you from your own dreams? Have you learned to distinguish between real support and disguised limitation? Share your story in the comments below because your breakthrough might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this story inspired you to keep fighting for your goals despite the doubters, hit that like button and subscribe because there are more stories like this one, and maybe yours will be next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.